Hey everyone, we're really excited today to be interviewing Rachael Killackey. She is the founder and executive director of Magdala Ministries, a space where women can find hope, healing, and freedom alongside each other from sexual addiction.
After beginning to share her testimony in college, Rachael has had the privilege of hearing dozens of beautiful stories of healing from sexual addiction and is pursuing certification in sexual addiction therapy. Aside from Magdala, she has worked in diocesan ministry and the pro-life movement. This is such a great discussion, and I can't wait for you guys to hear it. We're really excited to have you on. And I wanted to have you on the podcast because, first of all, I don't feel like there's a lot of people that talk about, women struggling with sexual addiction and pornography and masturbation, which you even note when I was reading about Magdala on the website, just that it's like a men's issue, and that's how it's always portrayed. And I don't know, when, like, as I was, growing up, I feel like no one ever talked about women struggling. I have a very distinct memory of us doing like the examination. So I grew up Catholic school my entire life, including college. And we were doing like an examination of conscience together, like before we had confession at our junior high or whatever. And this girl was like, masturbation. She's like, isn't that just a thing that like men do? Very loudly in front of the whole group. And I was just like, oh, like, yeah, just a very early memory of that being something said. So very clearly that's, yeah. But before we jump into that, just for our listeners that don't know who you are, which many of them might already, but can you tell us a little bit about yourself, just like where you're from, where you went to school? I don't know, whatever you feel like sharing.
Sure. It's all, the elevator bio, like when you're in class and people are like,
Yeah.
share your name and your major and something interesting about
One
you.
fun fact.
Yeah, like I actually have nothing fun about me. No. I am from Colorado originally. That's where I was raised. Raised in a devout Catholic family. I'm one of 6 kids. I love my family. I have amazing parents who both converted to the faith. So I was raised with kind of that convert zeal, which is awesome. I went to Ave Maria University in Florida, so just outside of Naples. I majored in theology there, and then I stayed on and got my master's in theology as well following college. And then I moved to Nashville where my husband was. So we got married in 2021. I worked for the Diocese of Nashville for a little while, and then we actually recently moved to Tampa, Florida, where we had our daughter. So I'm a mom, which is amazing. And had my first baby last September, and just I'm so excited and obsessed with her. But I guess formally speaking, I am Magdala Ministries executive director and founder. So I've been in charge of Magdala for 2 years now, or coming up on 2 years. And it's been the deepest well of joy in my life, work-wise, and haven't looked back since.
That's awesome. Megan just had a baby this year.
August.
Oh, really? Wait, what day?
August 31st.
Okay, yeah. So you were 5 days before me. I'm September 4th. So
We laughed that she was barely an August baby. It was like August 31st in the evening.
Oh, yeah. My daughter is 5 months old today. So I just feeling super emotional. I'm like, how does it go by this fast? It's crazy. It's crazy.
Oh, that's so sweet.
That's
it's funny. We actually have a former coworker who went to Ave Maria, so I'm like somewhat familiar with them.
Oh, really? Yeah. It's a good school. I love it. It's small, so you like know everyone or know of everyone, and everybody knows your business, but it's a wonderful place. I loved it.
I went to Franciscan University, and I always feel like those are the 2 schools that I know a lot of people that have gone to that really want to go to a super Catholic school, which is not why I went there originally, because I'm from Steubenville, so that's just how I ended up. But yeah, which I know people are always like, oh my gosh, you're from there. My aunt's a professor at Franciscan, so I've just grown up at the university, which now all of these Catholic people like Matt Frad and like big speakers are moving there, and it's so funny because I'm like, I'm good, I'm just gonna in Chicago.
Oh my gosh.
Like, ew, that's my hometown.
Yeah, exactly.
Don't go there.
Yeah. That's just funny. But yeah, well, that's I lost my train of thought, but so I guess I discovered you on Matt Fradd's channel, but I think I'd heard of Magdala Ministries through some other people that were using the resources and such, but I just thought it was such an awesome ministry because, like I said before, I don't see like many people talking about this. And you share very openly about your own struggle with sexual addiction. So as much as you're comfortable sharing, if you could just tell us a little bit about your own journey with that.
Yeah, absolutely. It's kind of an open book at this point. So it's like, what am I not comfortable sharing? I don't know. Yeah, so I was exposed to porn when I was 13. I was actually on Pinterest and it was erotica, so it was written pornography. Um, and I had kind of had some unwanted experiences as a child that had left me feeling really awkward and uncomfortable in my own sexuality. So I was just very confused about bodiliness, even. And yeah, just I think porn fit perfectly into that framework. I had an amazing therapist who later just spoke so compassionately to that part of my life and helped me heal a lot of that or receive healing in that part of my life. And she just said, like, yeah, you were set up perfectly for porn to be your answer to your discomfort.
Wow.
And I think that's the case for a lot of women and men now, is that porn is posed as an answer to a wound or a trauma that we have, whether major or minor. My traumas were minor, but porn still posed itself to me as an answer. So yeah, I knew it was wrong. My parents raised me with a really, wonderful, virtuous code. So I knew it was wrong, but I did think that it was something that only men struggled with. And I also justified reading it and continuing to read it and then watching it eventually. Just with like, I guess the line I would tell myself often was something like, well, I know not to do what they're doing in real life, so it's okay. Like I know, like it felt kind of phantasmal in the sense of like being dissociated from my everyday life. So I could keep going with those excuses. But my senior year of high school, I started trying to get some distance between me and my consumption. So I got a flip phone. I got rid of my smartphone, and that definitely helped. It gave me like a little bit of breathing room. But I did not really formally enter recovery until I was at college. So it was my first year of college in the fall semester. I went to this healing retreat, this like night of adoration. And I share this in most of my testimonies, but I went and I had been thinking about C.S. Lewis's The Great Divorce. There's like a passage in The Great Divorce with a red lizard on a man's shoulders and it's preventing him from entering heaven, and there's an angel asking to kill it. And for Lewis, the lizard does represent lust. And I just was really drawn in by that passage. I had read it a few years before. And I was thinking about it as I was walking to this adoration night at this healing retreat. And there was a Q&A going on. I walked in late. There was a Q&A going on, and I don't remember what question was asked, but immediately after I walked in, the microphone was passed to somebody to answer the question on this panel. And he said, there's a chapter in C.S. Lewis's The Great Divorce about a man with a red lizard. And I was like, okay, I think I need to finally get rid of this red lizard. And it was just a super powerful adoration experience. Like the Lord really just dug in and was like, do you want to be done with this? Do you actually want to give this up? And I was so exhausted by myself. And at that point, a really wonderful, kind man was pursuing a relationship with me, and I just felt so undeserving of him. That was part of my motivation too, was like, I want to be the kind of woman who can enter into this relationship purely and not be just marred by this duplicitousness that I feel all the time. So yeah, it wasn't a perfect journey after that. I still endured some relapses and whatnot. But I entered, a longer period of sobriety that first year of college, and then it just got easier and easier from there. So yeah, I'm super grateful for that prayer experience, but I also kind of want to emphasize that it was not the end, because I think we can think that we can pray these things away, but the Lord definitely broke an attachment that I had to porn that night for sure.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing, first of all, because I think it's incredible that you're so vulnerable and open about it, because there's a lot of shame that can come along with like acknowledging and admitting that part of your story. And I think it's interesting too that it kind of started with like the written side of things, because a lot of times I think women do struggle with the written pornography. And that's something even in my own experience as a teenager that I struggled with. And
Mm.
it's almost easy to justify because you're like, well, I'm not like going like www.pornhub.com and like looking
Right.
at something. So it was like an easy way to kind of like, deal with that shame that I was feeling of like, well, I can justify this or it's not as serious. Do you
Yeah.
see that as an issue with a lot of the women you interact with, that they like maybe start with like written porn, and then like
Mhm.
that leads to other like visual as well?
Mhm.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it, yeah, I think people get confused about like what pornography actually is, and they like to count written pornography out. But pornography is
Sure.
any like content that is designed to sexually arouse or entertain, right? So explicit content that is designed to arouse or entertain. So that can be written, audio, visual, and it can be found on places other than designated porn sites. I never accessed a porn site, if that clarifies anything. And I know many women who also did not, but I found it through other avenues and other websites. Yeah, written porn is a huge gateway for women. Some women just stay there, but some women kind of progress into more visual content because it's easier to access, I'd say. But um, what's interesting is men don't necessarily struggle with written porn, and not because men are solely visual and women are solely emotional. Like we like to make those generalizations,
Yeah.
but because there's a lot of studies done on women's imagination in their sexuality and its role.
Yeah.
And one of my favorite studies that I found, I not favorite in the sense of how it was conducted, but in the information it reveals, is two psychologists teamed up and studied a group of men and a group of women and showed them, visually stimulating sexual content. So they showed them porn, and they had them evaluate their responses. And the men evaluated their level of arousal based on their attraction to people in the video, whether men or women. And women attributed their arousal to their ability to imagine themselves as someone in the video. So this whole like men are visual, women are purely written or emotional, they just like romance novels, like that whole thing. It actually just totally falls apart. It's not about that, like men are visual, women are not. It's about women have this interplay between their imagination and their sexuality that isn't necessarily the case for most men. So men and women consume the same content, but for very different reasons and with very different kind of modes, I guess, of approach. But I think written porn, why it is so intriguing for women, is because it very much engages that imagination aspect that women tend to use.
Yeah.
Super
I
interesting.
It is that's really interesting. I never heard of that study, but
Mm-hmm.
I like that you mentioned that there is this stereotype that, oh, women are not visual like men are. And I've always found that so false in my own experience. I'm like, what are you talking
Yeah.
about? Like
Oh yeah.
yeah, I think, Megan and I, we've talked about our own like, different struggles. And I've never like accessed a porn site, but there's so much out there that can be
Mm-hmm.
triggering or that can draw you in. Just like on Netflix, these shows now that you don't
Yeah.
expect, like right in front of you, it's just a full blown sex scene. You're like, oh my gosh, but that, can be a gateway as well. And you don't
Mm-hmm.
realize that that's also can be pornography, even though it's not. I'm not typing into a porn site and looking up a porn video, but that
Yeah.
also is porn, and can be a huge struggle and something that like, oh, now you have that in your mind and you know where you can find this kind of content, and it's just on Netflix.
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's nothing necessarily like wrong or with you if you are intrigued by that or aroused
Mm-mm.
by that as a woman. It's not like, oh, I'm just super visual and no other women are. It's like, no, that's that's how the human mind works if you're a man or a woman.
Yeah.
But that's a really interesting study. So you kind of talked about it, but a little bit about your own healing journey. You mentioned that you had that, that one experience, but how did that look for you moving forward, finding freedom from sexual addiction?
Yeah, I have a really interesting kind of path, I guess. A little bit boring, but I don't recommend the way I recovered to people
Okay.
just because I got so much wrong. I continued to hide my story and not seek accountability for a little while. I, didn't put a ton in place to help me with my triggers for a little while. But it was this progression of, okay, let me, cut that off, let me cut that off, let me cut that off. It was like the whole, if your left arm leads you to sin, cut it off. I had to cut off a lot of limbs slowly over time. So I ended up getting rid of social media kind of as, again, just to get some space between me and what I was accessing, because I could regularly access porn kind of through Snapchat in particular was a huge one. And that's the case for a lot of women. Instagram is one of the biggest funnels for them, which is sad. They can bypass a lot of kind of accountability or filtering software that they have on their devices through social media. So I ended up getting rid of social media, and then I slowly started sharing my story with women around me. I did not admit it to the guy I was dating at the time, and I really regret that. But I did end up telling him later after the fact, after we had broken up and were kind of becoming friends again, I guess. We were on the same ministry team. So he saw me give like my first kind of little testimony, and we talked about it afterward. But it was honestly in starting to publicly share my story that I really grasped recovery and like made it my own. I don't recommend that for everyone. I think it was I would have loved to be more sure before I started sharing my story, but God does things the way he does them for a reason. So yeah, there are a few relapses in there in my memory. But yeah, I had to start really, there's the base things that are easy to get rid of. Like, okay, I need to get rid of social media, or I'm triggered by this. I need to get rid of that. I need to stop watching that show. I need to do this. But it was when I really dug into even more of like, okay, I need to stop listening to that kind of music because those lyrics are really triggering for me. I need to stop letting myself become so stressed because stress is a trigger. I need to stop like digging into my deeper emotional state and circumstances, and my mental health is when things really became like full swing too. But there was also like a phase even after I graduated college where I had been sober for a couple of years at that point, or a few years, I guess. But I was still feeling so caged up and awkward and uncomfortable in my sexuality and just like really anxious still. And I had to go and really dig in with a therapist and kind of get to the bottom of the wounds that had led me to porn in the first place. So, yeah, I mean, my journey kind of went in phases. I think that part is pretty normal for a recovery journey, but yeah, I think once people came into my life who could really keep me accountable, and again, like I dug into those deeper layers, is when I really saw things kind of turn around and change.
I love that you mentioned that it's more than just like, oh, well, if I get rid of the internet, then it's not going to be a problem anymore. And
Mm-hmm.
kind of digging to that deeper root reason. Because I feel like that's not talked about often, is that, especially for women, I know women that I've spoken with, even in my own experience, we have that, like you were saying, like the imaginative side of our sexuality. And so
Yeah.
a lot of times we're looking to fill some sort of void. And I've even spoken with a
Yeah.
lot of women that this like good desire that they had for romance and for a partner and
Mm,
for love, sort of porn came in as a way to try and fill that void. And it's like a hole that they're trying to fill, like, oh, I have this desire that's a good desire, and then porn comes in as a way to unhealthy try and meet that desire. So I think it's
yeah.
something that a lot of women can relate to. But what would you say would be the difference between someone maybe struggling with sexual sin in their life versus someone who would more be categorized as having an addiction to it?
Yeah, that's a great question. First, I think we can misuse the word struggle um a lot in Christian spheres. I didn't know this, but Matt Fradd actually was the one who told me that struggle means to violently resist. So I love that definition of the word struggle. It's like if you're struggling with something, you are violently resisting it. Um, so I think a lot of us in our sexual sin don't even struggle. We don't resist. We just kind
Mm.
of give in and hope for the best. But yeah, so people ask me a lot, like, how frequently did I consume porn? And I actually don't remember, because I think people use frequency as the only hallmark of addiction. It can certainly be an alarming one, but it's actually not really typically a hallmark of addiction. So there's a psychiatrist named Gerald May who wrote a book called Addiction and Grace. It just gave a framework for what addiction can look like for the Christian, because I think for a long time people saw addiction as a moral failure only, and not like something that can take over your brain and take on a life of its own, and you can feel powerless and out of control because you are. So he kind of was the first to really step in and say, like, hey, listen, Christians can be addicted and it's not a moral failure. You can't pray yourself out of the human condition. Like, this is a thing. So he talks about the hallmarks of addiction being withdrawal. So if you give up the substance or behavior, you have withdrawal symptoms from it, whether physical or mental. You have a loss of willpower. So you can say, I'm going to quit, but then you actually can't follow through. Loss of attention, where something can divert your attention and your focus from something important. Or a desire for a substance or behavior can divert your attention. And then he gives a couple more, but those are, I'd say, the most important ones to really think about. I mean, another one, I guess, is important is tolerance. Is you build up a resistance, or a numbness to a substance or behavior over time, and you need more and more in order to get your desired effect. So seeing the presence of those in my life were what told me, okay, this is a problem. I'm addicted. And I would say that to anyone who who's trying to evaluate where they are, is like, are you losing your attention? Are you losing your ability to be present? Are you losing your willpower? If that's the case, then there might be the presence of an addiction here. But I also wouldn't spend too much time evaluating whether or not that's the case, because the fact of the matter is, like, this can destroy your life, whether it's only a little present or very, very present. This can destroy your life and your relationships. So if you have it present at all, get rid of it. And there is inherently a difference between, like, okay, I have fallen to porn or masturbation a couple times in my life versus it's a more consistent temptation for me. But if it is consistent in any shape or form, whether that is a few times a year or monthly or daily, it's time to do something to get rid of it. And even if you've only fallen a few times, there's a trauma from that. We traumatize ourselves when we engage in unwanted sexual behavior. We create, even if it's just small pieces, we create small pieces of a really negative frame, at which we kind of look at our lives through. So I encourage you, whatever listeners, like, whatever level you're struggling with, to get help, because it can become quite the beast, whether it is or not already.
I agree. I do think, maybe it can be important. When I thought of that, that question, because I was interested in what you had to say about that. Just hearing you talk about it now, it's like, it kind of doesn't matter, whether it's a full-blown addiction or just a struggle, because in general it is, sin is harmful, and harms our relationship with God, with others, and ourselves. So no matter what level you're struggling with it, it's important to seek out help and grace, if you're Catholic, in the sacrament of reconciliation and just accountability. I think a lot of people can make, like, the excuse, if it is an addiction, then I'm not, which is true, you're not as morally culpable for it, but you still should be seeking out, probably, like, I mean, the grace from confession, like, even if it is an addiction, just going and talking about it there, even if maybe you are less culpable for it, or if you're not Catholic, like, still seeking out and talking to a trusted spiritual advisor or some, about it, can be great. That's just a thought I had when you were talking about it. But I love that you mentioned that if it is something that is a full-blown addiction, you can't just kind of like white knuckle your way through it and just avoid the temptations, like, well, I'm going to get rid of this. Like, there's something deeper going on inside of you, especially if it's something you've been struggling with from a young age, because unfortunately so many people are exposed at a young age to pornography, or just if you were wounded at a very young age, that led to your struggle with pornography. I know you mentioned your therapist said, like, you kind of went through some things that led to you, having an addiction to this. And yeah, I think sometimes we just see it as a purely immoral failure, and I need to just avoid this and white knuckle my way through it, instead of thinking like, no, there's like a wound I have that I need to address. And until I address this root wound, like I'm going to continue to struggle with sexual
Mhm.
addiction and sexual sin. And I saw that you guys are doing a book study on it, but I read the book Unwanted by Jay Stringer,
Yeah.
which is such an incredible book. It was the first time like I read something that was saying like, actually, like your struggles, they are a path to finding like the wounds that you have, and it can be a path to healing if you really look at
Mm.
what you're struggling with, even the kind of pornography that you're struggling with.
Yeah.
If anyone's listening that hasn't read this book, I highly recommend it. Even if you don't specifically struggle with sexual addiction, we all struggle with different like vices in our lives. Just talking about how that's just like a symptom of this like root wound that you may have. And when they did like studies, like even the kind of pornography that men and women watched, there was so many correlations with like directly with the kind of like way they were wounded when they were younger or in their childhood.
Mhm.
And I thought that was just such a like a beautiful way of like looking at, I guess, yeah, just looking at that and kind of attacking the addiction from the root and not just these symptoms that you're struggling with. Um,
Mm.
and the kind of shame, like just the amount of healing that you need. It's not just, oh, I'm going to stop watching Netflix. I'm going to stop doing this. You talked about like there's certain things you definitely should cut out of your life, but you're going to continue to struggle unless you go to therapy or find some kind of deeper healing. And I think a lot of people don't realize that. I think it's just a sin they struggle with, they need to cut off.
Yeah, and I find that a lot. As women come into Magdala, and my baby is resisting going down for a nap. My husband
Oh,
is trying. So if you hear her, I'm sorry. Um, yeah, I find that as women come into Magdala, there's a determination when they come in, like they're looking for the silver bullet. They're looking for the thing that will finally eradicate this monster out of their life. They're like, I want to be done. And they come in, and we kind of do have to take their hands and very gently say, like, okay, yes, we want to help you get rid of this, but we're also going to help you look into your own soul, which is a very hard thing to do, to confront yourself. But we're going to help you do it. I'd say that's even more what our curriculum and our community is focused on in our small groups, is that confrontation of this side of ourselves that we hate, and that we don't understand, and the wounded child in ourselves that never got the answers that she needed. And um, yeah, we really emphasize that, because I think that helps women achieve a longer term sobriety, even if it's not immediate. Like that work can be very triggering in itself to do. Um, it can help women maintain their healing for much longer and go way deeper than if they just, like you're putting it, do the white knuckle approach. That may get you sobriety for 3 to 6 months, maybe a year, but you will inevitably fall again because you're not actually answering your heart. You're not opening it up to what Jesus wants to say to you. So um yeah, so I totally agree. I think the white knuckle approach is never going to work. I think Jay Stringer in Unwanted, it just does such a beautiful job of immediately kind of setting the bar for, like, if you want to heal, you have to look at yourself. And that sucks, but you're going to discover by the end how beautiful you actually are and how God made you. And yeah, that's a very long, difficult process, but it's one that's so worth it. So worth it.
I also think the white knuckling approach in and of itself brings a lot of shame because like you were saying, like that loss of willpower, like for someone who has finally reached the point where they're like, I no longer like want this. Like this is something like you were saying, like I hate about myself, like this that you almost don't even want to face.
Mhm.
To then turn around and just be like, okay, I'm gonna like use all my willpower and stop. And when you inevitably stumble and you fall over and over and over again, that can just be so incredibly discouraging if that's your only approach. And I know from just talking with a lot of people too, it can be seen as like I could never overcome this then. Like I'm trying as hard
Mhm.
as I possibly can and like I can never overcome it. And I love, this approach of like let's look deeper. Like let's actually, allow Jesus to speak into us. Let's like go back. Like what is it that, what harm was caused to us? What hurt or wound is there that needs to be addressed? And like you were saying, it's really long and really difficult work, but it's a work that is a lot more encouraging, I feel like, and like
Mhm.
reduces a lot of that shame. Um, Yeah. What encouragement do you give women who are kind of in the midst of this?
I think, I mean, the first thing that you have to say to women because of the narrative at this point is just like looking them directly in the eye and saying like you're not alone.
Yeah.
That's like the
Yeah.
first thing, is like they have to believe they're not alone, because they're not. Like 1 in 3 porn addicts are women. And I think it's something like, now it's reported that like over 60% of women regularly consume pornography or engage in unwanted sexual behavior. Something like 78% of Christian women do. So I mean, it's a massive percentage. You are definitely not alone, which is
Yeah.
part of why I have no problem admitting this in a public space, is because I know that most of the women I'm speaking to have some sort of experience with this, whether it's prominent or not. But yeah, you're not alone. There's so much hope. And also what I've seen, not just in my own story, but just widely in the work that I've done, I've encountered the stories of hundreds of women at this point. Magdala serves over 1,000 women in like our small groups, on our campuses, and just through our content. So we're engaging a lot of women, and I've had the privilege of hearing a lot of stories at this point. And I've seen over and over that like lust does not come for the apathetic, the lazy, the numb. Like it doesn't come for those people. Like lust attacks the women who are the absolute warriors for charity. I mean, it's like I yeah, I literally see it every single time. Like lust it attacks the passionate, the ones who are bold, who desire to do something great for Jesus, who just want to love, the gentle, who are nurturing and beautiful and want to mother everyone around them. Like that's who lust attacks, because it knows it wants to take you out. So when I have a woman sitting in front of me admitting these things, I'm like, oh, you're going to become something so beautiful. And like God has such huge plans for you if this is your struggle. Like that's, and if you take hold of that belief, that's what brings you to the other side. You know, white knuckling control doesn't work. Hope does. Hope brings you through. So I think that's usually what I tell women, is like the very fact that you're even sitting here telling me this, yeah, it's evidence that God really put this beautiful, passionate heart within you, a huge engine, and he's going to do something really powerful with it. So let's go on a journey and see what that is. Let's get you there. So very simple, but that's usually what I say, and it so far has worked. So
I mean, that's beautiful, because I feel like when so many people encounter so much shaming from themselves and from others when they open up that they struggle with sexual addiction, as men or women, but especially women, because as we've said, and I don't think it can be said enough, that it's just the narrative that it's only men that struggle with this, and women feel so isolated. And whether it be from their friends, from themselves, or even in the confessional, I think there can be this just like reaction of disgust from people that maybe don't understand, like when women might say that, which is sad, because there's just so much stigma around women struggling. And I think there's just so much shame in that struggle, which is why so many women don't ever tell anybody, and they continue to struggle for so long, because you know, anything shoved in the dark, surrounded by shame, like we block out any way of healing. And women condemn themselves, like I'm just like broken in this way that nobody else is, and I'm so disgusting, and I'm not worthy of Jesus's love or of healing. And they try to just deal with it themselves, and they're afraid to open up. And we create these narratives about ourselves that we're just so disgusting and broken, and there's no hope for us, when really what you just said is so beautiful. And I just wish more women could hear that, which is why I'm so thankful that there's an organization out there that women can go to and find that healing and that community within other women that have struggled. And I wanted to read, I have it on my phone, just something from the website of Magdala on the about section, and then talk a little bit more about your inspiration to start that. And I think this is so beautiful. On your site, it says, "We know that pornography, masturbation, and other sexual addictions aren't just a guy problem. The need for women to be accompanied in the journey towards healing from a sexual addiction has gone sorely unmet, and that's why we are here. Magdala exists as a space where women can find hope, healing, and freedom alongside each other from sexual addiction. Our goal is to supply you with support, community, and accountability. We don't want you to reveal darkness, pain, and sin and then leave you there. Honest conversation and solid theology are at the core of who we are. And I do think that you have touched on this a lot, but can you talk a little bit more about your own discernment and journey of how you started Magdala, when you started that, like where you were in life when that came to you to start that?
Yeah, it's like my villain origin story. I love
Yeah.
it. Yeah,
Or
so
hero origin story.
Yeah.
it's like here we go. Yeah, I started giving my testimony when I was at Ave as a junior. I started hearing the first time I ever shared my story was at a Young Life camp. I worked for Young Life for over a year. Um, Also, I want to say very quickly, like I know you guys regularly discuss differences between Catholicism and Protestantism, which is beautiful. Like, thank you for having that ecumenical dialogue. It's so important. Protestantism has us licked on openness to this as a Catholic Church. I just want to say the most receptivity, the most encouragement, the most joy that I have encountered is with Protestants. Like when it comes to this topic, they have opened the doors for me in ways that the Catholic Church is still learning how to do. So I just think when you're wondering what can we do for women, look to our Protestant brothers and sisters because they have opened doors. And I don't think that's the case across the board, but just wanted to really give that plug that we can look to them as an example of how to actually like welcome women into a more sexual healing conversation. So that's been huge, and I've been really encouraged by that. And I love being Catholic, but we definitely have a lot to learn. Yeah. So anyway, I started sharing my story at Ave as a junior after being a Young Life leader, sharing my testimony at camp for the first time after I was a sophomore. That summer between sophomore and junior year. And then junior year, I was sitting in my moral theo class and just like very randomly felt the desire to start sharing my story a little bit more. I was like, okay, Lord, if you think it's time, I'm about a year sober. That makes some sense, I guess, but you'd have to like give me the opportunity because I'm not really going to put that out there. And then I literally walk out of that class and somebody comes up to me and says like, hey, we're planning this women's retreat and would you want to speak at it? And before I know what I'm saying, I just start saying, I was like, yeah, can I talk about porn addiction? And there was no going back from there. And she was like, yeah, absolutely. And it was a friend of mine planning the retreat. So she was super excited about it. But I shared at that retreat and then word just kind of started spreading on campus. And so I spoke at more women's events, some local youth groups in the area. But it was the end of junior year. I gave a talk at one women's event on campus and I was approached by like a dozen women after this talk. I can't remember how many exactly. And they would either like find me after the talk or in the days following, they would come up to me on campus when I was by myself and be like, can I talk to you? Can we go on a walk? One woman even slipped a note under my dorm door, like sharing her story with me. Like that's how in secret these women were approaching me. Just asking for help or just thanking me because they felt seen, which was beautiful. But I just really realized the need for support and community for these women. So I approached campus ministry about starting a support group, and then I let it fall of my senior year. I wrote the first edition of our curriculum because there was literally nothing out there for women when I looked it up. Like there was no resources that could, be used for a small group. So I wrote something like a 9 or 10 sessions curriculum for small groups and promoted it. And we started our first small group my senior year. My co-founder, Mary Jo, like came on so quickly and she was like, anything I can do to help you, like, let me know. And she's on my Magdala team now. So we've been working together on this topic for about 5 years, which is super joyful. But that first small group was just like the sweetest thing. It was so beautiful and just such a space of like honesty and healing. And it was so healing for me as the leader because I was sharing my story with other women in depth for the first time. And yeah, it was just beautiful. But I left the topic behind kind of to go to grad school. And then I started doing diocesan work. So it was about 2 years. And then I went back to Ave for a different reason. And they asked me to give a talk then to the small group at the time. So it was new women And I had a different path in mind for myself. At that point, it had been 2 years since I had really addressed the topic. And I gave a talk to them. And as I was walking away from the room, I turned back and saw them all. They stayed in the room to pray for a little while. Turned back and saw them, and I was like, this is my heart. Like, I love this topic. What am I doing? Like, not trying to do something with this. And I had tried a couple times, but like to talk to somebody about maybe just, maybe rewriting the curriculum or doing something, maybe a video series or whatever that we could offer to ministries, but nothing had ever come through. And then after that talk, I got back to my office a couple weeks later, and I was just like bored on my lunch break. And I had met Matt Fradd a couple years prior when I was leading the small group at Ave, and talked to him about it. And he gave me his contact info. So I just emailed him. I was like, you have no idea who I am or don't remember me, but this is how I got your info. And do you know of any women anywhere doing anything? Like, is there a blog? Are there retreats? Like, can I lend prayer or brain power to anything out there? And then he set up a call with me and just basically was like, there's nothing, and I think you should start something. If you do, I will support you. And this is a void in the church, and we need someone to step forward. You have a week to decide. Like, get back to me in a week. And I was like, oh, okay. So I mean, I just jumped off a cliff. Basically, I felt like I got blindfolded and pushed off a cliff, and it was awesome. I gathered a few women together, including Mary Jo and just some other women who had supported me like throughout my journey of starting the small group at Ave, and just we started with nothing. I made a website on Squarespace and was just like, what are we going to do exactly? And we've grown a ton since. Like I said, we serve hundreds of women, and we've updated our curriculum. We now print it and distribute it to our participants, which is huge. We were partnered with 10 college campuses to facilitate groups in person with them. Produce a podcast. It has really taken on a life of its own because the need was there. So that's a very long explanation, but that's how it began. And it still kind of feels like we're blindfolded, still falling from that cliff, but it's been such a joyful ride that we don't really care. So it's been awesome.
I just want to thank you.
That's amazing.
So much. Yeah.
Thank you.
I remember as you were speaking, I remember the first time I ever heard a woman like publicly speak about her own struggle with sexual addiction, and it was shocking to me because I was just so used to, you don't talk about this, and if you do, it's in a small group. Like at Franciscan, I remember seeing signs around of, it was so discreet, so anonymous, like if you struggle with this, it's anonymous, don't worry, like no one's gonna know that you contacted us. And I thought it was so awesome that there was a group there, and like I never even got the courage, because I've struggled with different things throughout my life, to contact this group because there was just so much shame and I was just so embarrassed. And the first time, I think it was just it was at a women's retreat that Franciscan put on every year. I forget what it's called. I'm blanking now. I guess it's been too long since I graduated, but I forget. It's like the Beloved retreat. Anyway, it's a retreat every year that they do for just women at Franciscan. And I remember her just sharing her testimony, and I was in shock. I was like, oh my gosh, like, I cannot believe that you were talking about this right now. But it was the beginning of me being able to break down shame surrounding my own struggle and be able to just talk with like friends about it. I think Megan was one of the first people that we've shared openly with each other about things that we've struggled with. And it was like even awkward for me then. I was like, oh my gosh, this is just so, I'm not used to talking about this. Like nobody talks about this. We like skirt around it, but women, we don't talk about this. And so I just want to thank you so much for following that call of the Holy Spirit to so openly talk about this, because it's not something that we should be so ashamed to talk about. Like it's fine, if you're not ready to talk about it, you definitely shouldn't. Like I do think there's a time for that healing that you need to go through. Megan and I even talk about that. We often like have to go through our own healing because you don't want to necessarily speak from like this open wound, always that there's some healing that you need to go through. But I just think that's so amazing, because I think a lot of the steps to healing we've talked about is breaking down that stigma and shame around the topic.
Yeah, I agree. And I think I was very scared sharing my story the first time. I was like shaking in my boots, like crying the whole bit, like just trying to prepare. But after the first time, I really haven't had too much of a problem since. But when I was starting Magdala, like one of the questions that I took to the Lord, like in adoration, the day after that call, and just being like, okay, I don't have much time to figure this out. And yeah, I don't know what to do, but I was like, Lord, like this would mean that my story becomes like public, like really public, and I don't know if I want that.
Yeah.
And I just heard very clearly, like, you're gonna wonder for the rest of your life what you could have done if you were willing to like sacrifice that. Like you're gonna wonder. And so I wasn't content sitting with that question. And I think that a lot of women, could really, really make a change if they were willing to share their stories from that healed place, like you're talking about. But just like, you're going to wonder for the rest of your life whose life you could have changed if you were just willing to let go of that need to seem perfect. Because I've been so consumed so many times throughout my life by what people think of me that I can't imagine what kind of things I've lost because of that, that preoccupation. So I think the more women that join the chorus of like this not just being a guy's issue, the better. And props to you guys for discussing this like on a podcast. That's huge. Who knows like what listeners have been set free by that. So it's huge. But yeah, I think I don't know. I've been very comforted by like how many saints, or even looking at the gospels, like how many of the apostles, like we know their greatest sins. Like we literally have Peter's denial like in writing. We reflect on it. We read it in church. And this guy, like, we've got his greatest sin right there in front of us. So who cares, if people know that I was a porn addict before they even know anything else about me, honestly. I really, I've slowly over time, like my pride has struggled to let that need to appear perfect go, but it's been when I do finally let a little bit go, it's been fruitful. But yeah, that is a hard thing, is getting over our shame and embarrassment, but also just our desire to be seen as better than we are,
Yeah.
I think also it is such a like a secret sin too, it's done so privately and in the dark, that I think that's why it's so incredibly beautiful that you've just followed the Holy Spirit's guiding in this and creating safe spaces for women to be open about this, because I definitely think there's, unsafe environments for someone to open up about this area of their life, but creating like very like safe, trusted places that are dedicated to their healing is such a, like you were saying, a needed thing, that there isn't a lot of resources out there. There aren't a lot of spaces. And I think that in and of itself kind of stops a lot of women from even coming forward, because they don't even know where to go. And
Yeah.
it's such a hard thing to even talk about, that you're not just gonna, go stand up in front of church and tell everybody. And so where do you go? And it can drive people back into isolation in the darkness. So I think your ministry is so incredibly needed, and I think it's proof of that you've reached so many women, that the Lord is blessing it.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I've listened to a few of your podcast episodes. A while ago, I discovered your podcast, and there was a podcast you talked about. I forget what the book is, but you talked about how we need to face. It's a C.S. Lewis, till we have
faces.
Yes,
Till we have
till we have
faces,
faces, which I started reading, didn't finish. I need to read more C.S. Lewis because I start all of his books, besides like the Chronicles of Narnia, when I read when I was like 7. Yeah, you talk about how we need to face the ugliness of our sin, of ourselves, but how that leads to deeper healing. So we've kind of touched on this, but just ways that we can face like pornography and like struggling with like those sins are terrible. They are really ugly things, and pornography is terrible. Like it is disgusting, and it's like ruining people's lives. But how do you kind of face your own brokenness, your struggle with these just like horrible sins, but then also recognize that that you've talked about your beauty and your goodness, and how to kind of combat that shame while also having that healthy guilt for the sins or things that you struggle with? Because I know that I myself have struggled with that.
Oh gosh, same. Yeah. And I like Brene Brown's summary of like, shame is I am bad, guilt says I did something bad. That's a very simple way to put it, but I really like that. It's like if you're feeling that I am bad, that's shame. Um yeah, I almost brought up this passage earlier from Till We Have Faces because that's like my favorite book. I love Till We Have Faces. Um but I mean, the main character is a woman who's ugly and like physically ugly, and reckons just with like a lot of suffering in her life, and the entire book is written as like a complaint against the gods for letting her be ugly and letting her life be ugly. Yeah. And when she finally gets to confront the gods and like say, this is here's my complaint, here's my whole life that you just allowed to be totally messed up, and why do you hate me? She finds she's just saying the same word over and over. Like she can't actually read out her confrontation as she wrote it. And obviously this is a mythical story, so C.S. Lewis was monotheistic. But yeah, the passage, like the quote is like he says something like, I know now why the gods do not let us speak nor answer. And yeah, he basically is just saying like, as long as we just have words to be let out to battle against more words, like nothing will actually come of that. And how can we speak to God face to face till we have faces is the biggest like line there. And this main character is definitely like a metaphor for all of us, but like that it's not until she finally just like there's like one thing that was in the center of her soul. Like, yeah, that's the quote, is like, until you confront the one word which has been at the center of your soul for years, like, yeah, you're just going to be saying the same babble over and over and over. And like, why should the gods hear the babble that we think we mean? And so oftentimes, like in our healing, in anything, but in sexual healing in particular, is like we are saying the same thing actually over and over and over and over. But we try to put on this face that it's something different. We try to be elaborate about it. We try to be eloquent, but it's actually just one thing. And if you dig it up, if you dig up that thing that's been at the center of your soul for years, it may be horrendously ugly, but you will be healed. And you'll see God face to face finally. Because it's not until you dig that up and you're like, okay, actually, this is the complaint. This is the thing that I've been holding against you. This is the lie that I've believed instead of your truth, Lord. Until you confront that, yeah, you're just gonna babble. And I think I've gotten to watch women in that process, and I've had my own process of that, of like, that's what I think my therapy journey. I had therapy before, but I was with a new therapist right after graduating college, and that's when I just really dug in to like, why do I feel so broken here? Why do I feel so irredeemable here? And I just had things to dig up. I had complaints to dig up. I had lies to dig up that I had held since I was a child, and just really like letting that come out and just being like, Lord, I hate this part of myself. I hate this. I feel so ugly here. I feel so irredeemably ugly here, and I feel like you have ignored me and neglected me and left me alone to die here. Why? And just letting that come up. And then finally, only when that happens, and I finally just let the mask drop and wore my face, and that way before him, I could actually see his gaze of love on me. And that's where everything changes. Until you take the mask off, like, he can't see you. I mean, he can, but you can't let his gaze pierce through, you know? So I think that's the process, is just like, we live in such a self-love culture that is so like dominated by like your own affirmation of yourself can be your healing, and it just can't. Like, speaking affirmations over yourself like doesn't do crap when you have like deep-seated addiction and self-hatred and woundedness, right? So like you have to let that come to the light, and you have to let only truth confront that. Your voice is not enough, his is. So I think that that's such a necessary part of the process in my mind. And it happens slowly, happens over time. It doesn't happen all at once. There's been many one words that I've had to confront in my lifetime. I still have so much brokenness that I know God will confront in his time. But yeah, there wasn't actual like turnaround in how I saw myself and my sexuality until I confronted that. Yeah, I felt so awkward in the presence of men and in the presence of women. Like, I felt like I didn't belong with women, but I felt like I couldn't be with men in like a really pure way. So I just didn't try. Yeah. And then going through that period of healing, I actually met my husband when I was in that therapy process. And that was the first man that I was in the presence of, where I was like, I'm not questioning myself right now. Like, I know who I am. I know I'm good, and I know I'm worth this. And like, I was able to like receive his pursuit in a totally different way. So that was a very tangible fruit of healing. But yeah, that confrontation is the hardest part. But once it happens, everything changes.
I love that image of, yeah, confronting that seed in you so that
Mhm.
the Lord's gaze can pierce us. I think that's so powerful, even just, to envision the Lord's gaze like piercing us and
Yeah,
breaking through that shame.
yeah, absolutely.
Have you ever heard of the podcast, The Place We Find Ourselves?
Yes.
Okay, I knew you. I was like, I feel like she and I are like similar things we've read, and
Oh
um,
yeah.
his 5-part series on healing. Oh my gosh, it was just so beautiful for me, and I talk about it all the time. But he talked with this psychiatrist or counselor, I think her name is Kathy Lorazel, and she talks about how healing is often like the passion of Christ, how in order to bring about this healing, he had to go through a certain death to finally reach the resurrection, and how a lot of healing is like it's facing like that death, that ugliness, that just the worst, the parts that we're the most ashamed of, but letting God into those. And it's scary because you're like, okay, I'm gonna let go. Most people want to jump over, like, the death,
Yeah.
that the Good Friday, the Saturday, they want to go and they want to hop right over. But it's like, no, it's like a U shape. You have to go down into the death, to just like Jesus did, like descending into hell. That's scary. But eventually the resurrection will come. Like you will come back out of it. And that's been a huge part of my healing journey in multiple areas. But I think a lot of, healing from this is just, it's okay. Like you can trust Jesus, you can let him into those places that are scary, and it is vulnerable. You're opening yourself up and you're facing that yourself. Which we want to avoid because we're so scary, like the pain, the emotions, like that will come from that. You're like, there's no way I'm going to come back from this. There's no way I'm going to be able to heal if I let myself, go that low. But it's like, no, Jesus will meet you there, and he's not afraid to meet you there. And he showed us that on the cross, that he's not afraid to like show himself and his brokenness and being battered, because he wants that from us too. He wants to see our wounds. He wants to be there with us, and he's not afraid of it. And he was that vulnerable with us and showed us that himself. And the resurrection will come from us, and you can trust God that it will. And yeah, I just think that is just so beautiful. And that is a huge part of healing. So anyone listening, like, it's really scary. It is very vulnerable, and you are letting go a lot of control. But just allowing Jesus to come into those places, and that, he will heal you. I don't know what timeline, but the resurrection, it will come.
Yeah. That was
Yeah.
so well said. I just kind of just want to sit in that. That was so well said. Thank you. Yeah.
I can't take any credit for that. So
Yeah.
yeah, that podcast, which we should link below, if
Yeah, we
anyone wants
will.
to.
So good.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Rachel, thank you so much for coming on and for sharing your story and for just sharing your work that you do. And yeah, we just want to reiterate again that we just are so grateful for the ministry that you're doing. Truly just being the Lord's hands and feet for these women. So yeah, thank you so much for giving us your time and for talking with us about this, because it's, yeah, like Jackie said earlier, it's something that isn't often spoken about in this way. And so I think a lot of healing can be brought about even just by starting these conversations. So thank you so much.
Yeah. Thank you for having me. You guys are awesome. Really
And
appreciate it.
anyone listening that struggles, we're going to, of course, leave the link to Rachel's ministry, Magdala, and also just Megan and I, if you ever want to reach out to someone that or that you listen to, like, we definitely are always open to talk about this and, one-on-one. But there are places for healing. You don't need to be, ashamed of this struggle. Yeah, there is a way to truth, to light, to healing. And yeah, there are resources. So yeah, Rachel, just want to thank you for being one of those resources and for coming on. Yeah.
Yeah, of course. Praise God.